Alright, so you want to own a nightclub. You rent a space, buy some liquor, hire a DJ, open the doors on Friday night, and watch hundreds of people walk in and spend money. Sounds simple, right? Except it isn't simple at all. It's not even close to simple. Because what looks like a bar selling alcohol is actually a complex financial operation involving rent, licenses, labor, insurance, security, promoters, DJs, marketing, inventory, debt, and dozens of other expenses. And every single one of those expenses has to be paid, whether 1,000 people walk through the doors tonight or only 100. And that's the problem. Because a nightclub can sell a bottle of liquor that costs a few dozen dollars for $500. It can sell it for $1,000. Sometimes even thousands of dollars. A single VIP table can cost a customer more than an average family spends on an entire vacation. From the outside, it looks like one of the craziest money-making machines in the service industry. But here's what revenue doesn't tell you. A nightclub can generate millions of dollars in revenue and still lose money. Because a nightclub isn't really selling alcohol, it's selling attention. It's selling the feeling that tonight, in this city, there is nowhere more important to be than the room behind that door. And as long as people believe that, they'll keep paying. But the moment they stop believing, the rent is still there. Payroll still has to be covered. Insurance is still running. The DJ still wants to get paid. The debt is still due. And the room that once looked like a money-printing machine can suddenly become one of the most expensive assets in the city to keep alive. This is the real economics of owning a nightclub. Most people think that when they buy a nightclub, they're buying a bigger bar, a room, a liquor counter, a sound system, a stage, a few VIP tables. But that's not the most valuable thing. What you're really buying is the ability to make people want to be in the same place at the same time. That's a very strange product. Because a bar can survive if only a handful of customers show up. A restaurant can serve 30 people instead of 100. But a nightclub has a different problem. If the room is too empty, it looks unsuccessful. If it looks unsuccessful, people don't want to go in. If people don't want to go in, it gets even emptier. It's a feedback loop. And the opposite works too. A line outside makes the room inside look desirable. A crowded room makes other people want to come in. More people create more energy. More energy creates more demand. More demand allows the club to charge higher prices. Higher prices create a sense of exclusivity. And that sense of exclusivity makes even more people want to be there. That's the machine. But it's also the biggest weakness. Because once that loop stops, it can reverse very quickly. Look at a bottle of vodka. Let's say it costs a few dozen dollars. At a normal store, the selling price might only be somewhat higher. But inside a famous nightclub, that same bottle can sell for hundreds or even thousands of dollars. Why? You could say, because the club is greedy. But that's not the whole story. The customer isn't buying the liquid inside the bottle. They're buying everything around it. They're buying the table. They're buying privacy. They're buying faster service. They're buying a better position. They're buying attention. And sometimes, they're buying a social signal. I can afford to spend this much. That's why bottle service is one of the strangest pricing models in the service industry. A group might spend $5,000 in one night, not because they need $5,000 worth of alcohol, but because they want everything that comes with it. The bottle comes out, the lights turn on, the music changes, the staff walks across the room, everyone looks, and for a few seconds, the customer becomes part of the show. A nightclub isn't just selling a product, it's selling the social theater surrounding that product. This is where the dream starts getting expensive. Because before you have customers, you need a room. And that room has to be in the right place. A nightclub can't simply rent the cheapest space in town. You need traffic. You need accessibility. You need tourists, or locals with money to spend. You need an area where nightlife already exists, or has the potential to become a nightlife district. And those places usually have one thing in common. The rent is expensive. But rent is only the beginning. Landlords know that nightclubs are high-risk tenants. Noise, drunk customers, property damage, complaints, security issues, police, insurance, legal disputes. So the lease terms can be tougher, the security deposit can be larger, and simply getting access to the space can become a major part of the financial equation. Then you have to turn that empty room into a nightclub. And this is where millions of dollars can disappear before you sell your first cocktail. Electrical systems, sound, lighting, HVAC, fire protection, cameras, bathrooms, bars, POS systems, stages, VIP areas, soundproofing, furniture. Everything has to be good enough to convince customers that the price you're charging is worth it. Because in nightlife, the room itself is the product. If the room looks cheap, customers won't want to pay premium prices. And then there are the licenses. Something that sounds incredibly boring until it determines whether your business is even allowed to exist. You can have the perfect location. You can have a famous DJ. You can have 2,000 people who want to get inside. But if you can't legally sell alcohol, almost all of that becomes meaningless. In some cities, liquor licenses are limited. That means you can't simply apply for one. You have to find a way to gain access to one. And that right can be extremely valuable. In other words, before you can sell the product, you have to pay for the right to sell the product. Now the doors open. Customers walk in, and the money starts flowing. The first revenue stream is the cover charge. Let's say 700 people pay $30. That's $21,000. Before they've even bought a drink. That's an attractive source of revenue. But it's also one of the easiest to lose. When the club is hot, ticket prices go up. When the club is struggling, prices come down. Guest lists appear. Discounts appear. Free entry appears. Because sometimes the owner would rather have 500 people walk in for free than have a room with only 150 paying customers that looks empty. And here's an important insight. In nightlife, a customer can sometimes be valuable even when they don't pay. If their presence makes 10 other people buy a table, they've become part of the product. Then there's the bar. This is where the math starts looking incredibly attractive. A bottle has a low cost. A cocktail might contain only a few dollars worth of ingredients. But the customer might pay $20, $25, or $30. Bottle service can be much higher. But this is where beginners make a mistake. They look at gross margin. They don't look at leakage. Liquor gets spilled. Employees overpour. Drinks get comped. Inventory disappears. Friends get free drinks. Mistakes happen. And in a chaotic environment, those small losses can add up to a lot of money. So a club might sell hundreds of thousands of dollars worth of drinks, but that doesn't mean hundreds of thousands of dollars becomes profit. But the really interesting money is here. Bottle service. A VIP table isn't just a table. It's a product priced according to hierarchy. A regular ticket buys access. A better table buys convenience. VIP buys privacy. High-end VIP buys attention. And the most expensive table is often the one that the most people can see. That's why a relatively small amount of floor space can generate a huge share of the revenue. Imagine 10 people spending $5,000. You've just generated $5,000 in revenue from a very small group of customers. If they order more, if they upgrade, if they come back, the value gets even higher. That's why a nightclub doesn't optimize floor space the way a retail store does. It optimizes the value of every position inside the room. In other words, you don't make money from the number of square feet. You make money from the difference between those square feet. Imagine a club generating $12 million in annual revenue. Sounds incredible. Now start taking the money apart. Bar, VIP, cover charges, events, brand partnerships. Then subtract rent, labor, security, talent, promoters, insurance, marketing, utilities, maintenance, inventory losses, credit card fees, legal expenses, debt, and capital expenditures. Suddenly, that $12 million doesn't look quite as incredible as it did a minute ago. This is the most basic mistake people make when looking at a nightclub. High revenue does not mean high profit. A bottle of liquor can have an enormous margin, but the business has to pay for the entire room, and that room is not cheap. A nightclub needs an entire army: bartenders, barbacks, servers, hosts, security, management, cleaning crews, technicians, and people working behind the scenes. But labor in nightlife has one unusual characteristic. It's both a cost and part of the product. Slow bartenders, customers buy less. Weak security, risk goes up. Bad VIP hosts, high-value customers don't come back. A chaotic entrance, the club feels cheap. So you can't simply slash labor to improve margins. Cut too much, and you might destroy the very experience that's generating the revenue. Then there's talent. A major DJ can cost tens of thousands of dollars. Sounds insane. But from the club's perspective, the DJ isn't just playing music. They're a demand generator. Their name can make hundreds or even thousands of people decide, I'm going to that club tonight. But it's also a gamble. You can spend a huge amount on talent and still not make enough money that night. Because traffic is not spending. Someone walking through the door doesn't mean they're going to buy a table. It doesn't mean they'll order bottle service. It doesn't mean they'll come back. And that's where promoters come in. Promoters bring customers, birthday groups, influencers, high-spending customers, people with social reach. But there's a problem. You may not actually own that crowd. If another club offers the promoter a better deal, they can move the crowd somewhere else. The club still owns the room, but it no longer owns the momentum, and that's one of the most dangerous weaknesses in the model. Imagine you walk into a nightclub. There's barely any room to stand. There's a line outside. The VIP tables are full. The music is loud. Everything looks perfect. You think, this business must be making a fortune. Not necessarily. Some of the people inside may not have paid. Guest lists, comps, influencers, invited guests, discounted customers. All of them can be used to create one thing, perception. Because in nightlife, perception is part of the product. But that creates another trap. A room can be incredibly crowded, while yield per customer is extremely low. A smaller crowd, with every customer spending $1,000, can have much better economics. So the question isn't, is the club full? The question is, who's inside? A nightclub rarely dies overnight. It usually starts with very small changes. The line gets shorter. The guest list gets longer. Table minimums come down. Promoters ask for more. VIP spending declines. Old customers stop coming back. And then someone says the dangerous sentence, this place isn't what it used to be. In most businesses, that might just be an opinion. In nightlife, it can be the beginning of a downward spiral. Because customers come, because other customers come. When one group leaves, another group notices. When the second group leaves, the room starts changing. And when the room changes, pricing power falls. That's the domino effect. Let's say the club's revenue falls 20%. From $12 million to $9.6 million. That might not sound catastrophic. But now look at the costs. Rent doesn't fall 20%. Debt payments don't fall 20%. Insurance doesn't fall 20%. Licensing costs don't fall 20%. A large portion of labor doesn't fall 20%. And the infrastructure certainly doesn't fall 20%. So a 20% decline in revenue can cause a much larger decline in profit. That's operating leverage. And this is exactly why nightlife is dangerous. When everything goes right, operating leverage can make profits rise very quickly. When things go wrong, it works in the opposite direction. A relatively small amount of revenue disappearing can wipe out a huge portion of the profit. And this is where many owners make another mistake. The club starts struggling, so they spend more money. Bigger DJ. More marketing. More promoters. More comps. Bigger events. New renovations. Everything seems reasonable. But if the real problem isn't marketing, but relevance, then you're using money to solve a problem that money can't easily fix. You can buy advertising, but you can't easily buy cultural relevance. You can hire a DJ, but you can't guarantee that everyone will feel like the night is special. You can cut prices, but discounting too aggressively can destroy the very sense of exclusivity the club is selling. And that's how the spiral begins. Demand falls, costs rise, margins shrink, more money gets spent, cash burn increases, Demand is still weak. Studio 54 is one of the most famous examples. New York, 1977. Long lines. Celebrities. Models. Musicians. Finance executives. Everyone wanted in. It became an icon. But behind the lights, legal and tax problems eventually shattered the image of an unstoppable money machine. And that's the important lesson. Popularity is not durability. A club can be famous without being sustainable. It can be packed while having weak economics. It can generate enormous revenue while still being fragile. A line outside tells you people want to get in. It doesn't tell you how much debt the business has. It doesn't tell you what the real costs are. It doesn't tell you how exposed it is to legal risk. And it certainly doesn't tell you how much cash the owner actually has left. A nightclub also has to deal with something many other businesses don't face as aggressively: cultural aging. A room can be incredibly hot in its first year. But by year 4, it might just be the same old room. And in nightlife, familiarity can sometimes be the enemy, because customers want something new, a new place, a new story, new people, a feeling that they're somewhere other people haven't fully discovered yet. That's why major operators don't always own just one club. They build portfolios. One weak market can be offset by another. An aging concept can be replaced by a new one. A declining city can be balanced by another market. Scale doesn't make nightlife safe, but it can make the risk easier to manage. Nightclubs don't make money evenly. They make money by the night. Friday, Saturday, holidays, New Year's Eve, festival weekends, tourist season. A handful of huge nights can contribute a massive share of the year's profit. That makes the model extremely sensitive. Tourism slows. Locals spend less. A new competitor opens. A new regulation appears. An incident happens. Or the economy enters a recession. And sometimes the first thing to disappear isn't the crowd. It's high-end spending. The customer who used to buy a $5,000 table now buys a $2,000 table. The customer who used to order 3 bottles now orders 1. The room is still loud, still crowded, still full of music, but the economics underneath it have weakened. The year 2020 showed what happens when the core product of nightlife disappears: the crowd. No crowd, no nightclub, no revenue, and revenue can fall almost to zero. But the rent is still there, debt is still there, insurance is still there, other obligations are still there. That's a lesson many industries never had to experience at quite the same extreme. Nightlife depends on physical presence. When that presence disappears, the entire revenue engine can stop. The pandemic didn't create the fragility. It simply made that fragility impossible to hide. So, should you own a nightclub? The answer is yes, if you get it right. The right location, the right license, the right concept, the right crowd, the right pricing, the right promoters, the right talent, the right cost structure, and the right timing. When all of those things work together, the economics can be extremely attractive. But if you build too expensively, depend too heavily on promoters, overpay for talent, misjudge the customer, or let a new competitor steal the attention, everything changes. You still have the room, you still have the bar, you still have the license, you still have the sound system, but you no longer have the most important thing: demand. And at that point, you're trying to protect yesterday's cost structure with today's revenue. That's when the glamour disappears, and the mathematics start winning. So what is a nightclub really? Not a bar, not a music venue, not a room full of people. It's a machine that converts attention into status, into urgency, into spending. When people believe your venue is the place they need to be, they pay. They pay to get in. They pay to skip the line. They pay for a table. They pay to be seen, and they pay to be seen by other people. But the entire model rests on one incredibly fragile assumption: that people still believe you're important. The moment that belief disappears, the music is still playing, the lights are still on, the liquor is still cold, the staff is still working, but pricing power starts disappearing. And when pricing power disappears, The costs that were hidden behind the lights begin to show themselves. That's why owning a nightclub can be one of the most profitable businesses, and at the same time, one of the most dangerous financial traps. You're not really buying a nightclub. You're buying temporary ownership of being fashionable. And fashion always has an expiration date. But if you think a nightclub is a brutal enough business, wait until what you're buying isn't a room full of people, but a skyscraper full of debt, elevators, empty floors, and hundreds of millions of dollars in capital. All right, so you want to own a skyscraper,